As has become a weekly tradition, the Seahawks got off to a fast start in Los Angeles yesterday, only for the offense to go ice cold in another defeat to the Rams. What can be done to fix this offense that remains stagnant after the first quarter? We're going to be breaking it all down on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in tiny Richmond, Indiana, or Palm Beach, Florida. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks fell to 6-4 yesterday, getting swept this season by the Rams, who've only won 2 of their other 8 games, but that tends to be how things go with division rivals. And it was a hard-fought game, but the Seahawks were unable to hold on to the lead they had for the entire game. We're going to be diving into the continued offensive struggles for the Seahawks after the first 15 minutes. We're going to be answering your mailbag questions, and we're going to dish out our Monday musings, in-depth takeaways after revisiting yesterday's loss in LA. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's become seemingly a weekly tradition. The Seahawks came out red hot on offense yesterday at SoFi Stadium. Maybe the most impressive drive they've had the entire year, marching 14 plays, 75 yards, converting all 3 of their third down conversion opportunities, and culminating with Geno Smith hitting DK Metcalf for an 8-yard touchdown to give Seattle the lead, a lead that they would hold all the way till the final 2 minutes. But therein lies the problem, Robin. This has been an issue all year long for the Seahawks. They have been one of the best offenses in the NFL in the first quarter. And then after that, it's just been downhill. Everything has unraveled. And unfortunately, with injuries being added to that component yesterday, Ken Walker III going down, Geno Smith getting banged up, missing several snaps in this game, it ended up rearing its ugly head again yesterday. This continues to be a major problem for the Seahawks. And the statistics are mind-numbing when you look at just how bad the Seahawks have been in the last 3 quarters offensively and just how good they've been in the first quarter. And really, this has been a yearly trend now, 3 losses of their 4 where they scored at least 2 of their first 3 possessions. That should not be happening.
No, it really shouldn't. And I think that anybody who has watched the Seahawks game over the last month or so basically has noticed this trend as well. But this is one of those times, Corbin, where the stats really do back up what your eyes are seeing. If it feels like Shane Waldron as the play caller, it starts off hot, Geno Smith as the thrower of the football, and obviously Seattle's wide receivers and running back. If everything is really, it begins crisply and then absolutely falls apart as the game goes on. Corbin, I know that you have some statistics here that you're eager to show that demonstrate exactly what that you're talking about here.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I did a ton of research on this today while I was flying back from Los Angeles. It was one of those things that it was just on my brain. I'm like, this has been such a problem all year, but are the stats going to back up what I'm seeing with my eyes? In fact, it was worse than what my eyes have seen, to be honest with you. You look at the numbers, Rob, in the first quarter, this is a top 5, top 10 offense in every meaningful category. They are in the top 10 in touchdowns, top 10 in field goals. They haven't turned the ball over once in the first quarter all year. They are in the top 5 in success rate, EPA per play. They are 3rd in third down conversion percentage. That was one that shocked me. But then I figured out why that number is low for the entire season. It's because of the other 3 quarters. And this is the numbers that's really staggering to me. 20.7% third down conversion rate and 20% conversion rate in the third and the fourth quarter. So this is not for just one of those quarters. They are at 1 out of every 5 in the third and fourth quarter. We saw that trend continue yesterday. And you see all the yellow and red, those of you watching on YouTube. That's not good. That means you're either in the middle of the pack or you're in the bottom third if you're in the red. They have a ton of stats where they are in the red after the first quarter. And so clearly, this is a major problem that is not just showing up on the field. The stats in this case do not lie. The Seahawks have started hot, and then they truly have been on the ice block in the last 3 quarters, aside from a few exceptions.
Yeah, and that's the one that really surprised me is just how obvious it is when you look at those statistics, especially as you mentioned the third down conversion rate. For it literally to go from being top 3 in the NFL in the first quarter to then dropping down every single quarter thereafter, I think that is, again, an indictment on the play caller. I think it's an indictment on the quarterback. It's an indictment on just about everything. To me is the exact opposite was the case with the Los Angeles Rams, where I'm going to use some boxing analogies in today's program, Corbin. And to me, it felt like the Seahawks came out with very much a game plan here. They started off with kind of a flurry here, and the Rams almost kind of played a little bit of a rope-a-dope type of a strategy by basically just taking a couple of Seattle shots and then kind of staggering a little bit before they came out swinging in the second half. It basically was a mirror image of what we saw where it was Seattle had a disappointing loss to start the season, where Seattle comes out with all of their haymakers, starts off really hot, and then of course the Rams wind up winning at the very end with the kind of a decisive knockout. And that to me is what was so kind of staggering about this performance, because it almost felt like the Seahawks were kind of, again, punch drunk a little bit with the way that they attacked this football game. Their inability to be able to make any type of adjustments is not only something that is showing up against the LA Rams, as those statistics demonstrate. This has become a season-long problem and something the Seahawks have absolutely got to change. Otherwise, they are not going to have to worry about any kind of playoff contention, although that would be the one caveat that I would say here. The Seahawks, as it stands right now, have a pretty significant lead when it comes to making the playoffs. They will be in the playoffs if this kind of track record continues, but still, what are you talking about here? You're talking about going from a possible divisional winner. Certainly this game against the 49ers coming up here would have been for first place. Now it just feels like you're hanging on with bated breath. Can this team actually make a postseason run?
The thing is, Rob, if the Seahawks win this game Thursday night, though, they'll have the tiebreaker. They will be the NFC West leader. So it's not like all hope is lost, but it's hard to look at stats like that from a 10-game sample and be optimistic. And, I'll have more thoughts as we go in this episode. I have a very strong opinion on where things stand right now, but I want to leave our listeners with this before we go into the mailbag. I did get a chance today to ask Pete Carroll, and I know he's getting tired of us asking about third down, but we're going to keep asking about it because of how bad it has been for this offense. It's got so many talented players. I asked him what he thinks might be the main symptom behind it, and I thought his answer was somewhat intriguing in regards to how he approached it. Take a listen.
Started out so nicely, yesterday on offense, we were clicking and looking good, and the fourth down conversions added to it. We have to continue to adapt as the game goes on to make sure that we're making the plays that are available to us, and that's the thrower, that's the catchers, that's the calls. We're going to make sure we're making the right calls as we continue through the game. Seems like we're losing our momentum on third downs for some reason, and so we just got to execute better and keep putting the ball in the guys' hands that'll make the plays for us.
He immediately went to the word adjust, and he's talking about everybody, but this feels like a real play calling issue to me. And I'm not going to put it all on Waldron's shoulders, but it just seems like they get away from the script and then suddenly the defense makes their adjustments and then the offense can't make adjustments, or they stop doing what is working. I felt like yesterday that was the biggest problem. You mentioned the boxing analogy, Rob. It was like Hagler versus Hearns at the beginning, and they were just flying at each other, really aggressive, and then suddenly it got passive, and then we're not going to run the football. Next thing you know, you have multiple 3-and-outs. You get a turnover, your quarterback's knocked out. It was just a really rough game to watch on the offensive side of the football, and you didn't see the adjustments. That has been a chronic issue for this football team on offense. And with this gauntlet coming up, starting with the 49ers Thursday night, you better figure it out or this season could get away from you. Even with the cushion they currently have, you've got 4 really good football teams coming up in a row, and you could lose all 4 of those games if you do not figure out this issue on offense. And suddenly you're under 500 and the playoffs look like a long shot. So this has got to get corrected. But I don't know how optimistic we can be that 10 games of the season, they still haven't figured this out. We shall see. Coming up next, we're going to answer your questions on our weekly mailbag. Don't go away. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions when I was managing a site. I was able to get top candidates. It made the process easy and seamless. All you have to do is create your job post and then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word you're hiring. They've got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience to quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be rejoined by my co-host in crime, Rob Morang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Coming up tomorrow, Tell the Truth Tuesday. Things are going to be shifting a little bit here. We are going to be dishing out a special short week edition of Tell the Truth Tuesday that has a lot more scouting on the upcoming opponent. And we have to make changes just as the teams do with less practice time and really just walkthroughs leading up to Thursday's game. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to our mailbag now, shall we, Rob? Our first question here, and this is a pretty blunt question, but I understand why it's being asked. Is Frank Clark bad now, or is this just adjusting to a new scheme system? Again, I know it's very blunt, but I felt like this was a question that we needed to tackle, Rob, because I'm just going to say this before I let you answer the question. The only time I remember him being on the field the last 4 weeks is yesterday missing a tackle really bad. That's the only play that I can remember him being on the field, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, he has been basically non-existent since Seattle made that big signing. I certainly was expecting more from Frank Clark. I think the pass rush in general was a huge disappointment against the Rams. Obviously, this was a road game, but still was expecting that to be a huge part of Seattle's success against the Rams. Instead, I thought that it was arguably its biggest disappointment, at least on the defensive side of the ball. But Frank Clark specifically, Corbin, have not yet seen the burst and the power that made him one of the more feared pass rushers in all of the NFL over his career. And so unless that is a change, then I think that the Seahawks have to start considering some younger players rather than going with a veteran and Frank Clark, who I have a great deal of respect for, but you have to actually be able to produce if you're going to be warranting this playing time.
Maybe there was a reason Denver moved on from him the way they did. And I have some contacts that cover the Broncos that were surprised he made the team out of training camp. So it might be a case where we sometimes see guys just hit a wall, but I have not seen anything to this point. And as you mentioned, it's a perfect segue for this next question here from Eric Grimwade. Taylor and Clark seem to be struggling at keeping contained and pressuring. What are your thoughts on elevating Levi Bell, an elite athlete who played very well in the preseason, from the practice squad this week? What are my thoughts? It better happen. That's what my thoughts are. I have been wanting to see Levi Bell play ever since Uchenna Nwosu got hurt. I have wanted to see the Seahawks give this kid a chance for a couple of reasons. One, you mentioned the elite athlete for 260 pounds. And this is a guy that played 3-tech last year in college, but he's played off the edge. He brings versatility. a relentless motor. You know he's going to give everything he's got as a run defender. And I love the burst that I saw in the preseason. And I know it's just preseason games, but Rob, you and I were both at training camp. We got to watch this kid go against Seattle's starting offensive line. And he had some very dominant stretches in practice going against them. So I have been itching to see this kid get an opportunity. You're on a short week. You're not getting production from Taylor or Clark. If there is a game, and I know it's the 49ers, but how awesome would it be to see Levi Bell get a chance and get a couple hits on Brock Purdy? I think it could happen. So, yeah, I don't think this is a bad idea at all. In fact, if I'm running Seattle's roster this week, if I'm in charge of personnel, I am begging to get him on the roster this week if possible. Our next question here, we're going to swing to the backfield now, Rob. If Ken Walker III has to miss time, which it certainly sounds like he's going to, can we expect Kenny McIntosh as Charbonnet's backup, or will it be DJ Dallas?
Oh, I think that it's going to be Kenny McIntosh. I think you're still going to see DJ Dallas get significant opportunities, but just in reading between the lines of what Pete Carroll was saying during his Monday press conference, it sounds like he is every bit as eager as you are for Levi Bell. I think that's how Pete Carroll feels about Kenny McIntosh. And you and I, of course, have been pretty excited to see Kenny Mac out there as well. I think that he will add a different level of burst and certainly some receiving chops. Perhaps make Seattle's offense that much more explosive. So yes, while it obviously is unfortunate news that Kenneth Walker III going down injury, I am excited to see what Kenny McIntosh to bring the Seahawks. This kid is a real NFL running back that I think could be a starter for a lot of different clubs. I'm excited to see what he might be able to provide Seattle and give them the 1-2 punch that I thought that they were missing once Ken Walker got hurt against the Rams.
And our question here from SundownX_69 on Threads: what did the defense do right or above expectations yesterday that maybe they weren't doing in week one? And Rob, I just like this question because it took an optimistic viewpoint. And the Seahawks only gave up 17 points yesterday. You should win games in the NFL when you give up 17 points. And oh, by the way, this Rams team put up 30 on you in week one. So there clearly were some areas they improved. And even though there were penalties and there were a few that were pretty bad on the Seahawks in the secondary, I think that the difference here is just number 21 being on the field, if we're being honest. And there were some mistakes made by him, although that WWE tackle, yes, it's illegal. No, you should never do it again. But the strength that this kid has in a 181-pound frame, the way he throws guys around is really fun to watch. Nearly had a pick six in this game, got his fingers on it, made a couple big plays early, had a sack on Matthew Stafford. I just think his presence in the lineup just made the secondary that much better. And Rick Woolen's playing a lot better football now than what he was a few weeks ago, too. So to me, that is the biggest difference. Matthew Stafford wasn't throwing the ball all over the place because the Seahawks secondary wasn't allowing them to, even with the pass rush being very hit and miss in this game. To me, that was the biggest difference compared to week one from a positive standpoint. Our next question, Rob, you and I both get to answer this one. Coming from Elvis Trubinsky: who's been the biggest surprise, biggest disappointment so far this year? And Rob, I know that you and I don't like to delve into disappointments, but I mean, this is real life, and there are disappointments, and certainly there's players that have been positive surprises as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in right now with a disappointment because I was among those who really thought that Darrell Taylor was going to have a splashy season, and it has been a horrific season instead. The lack of instincts has been an issue that we've talked about going back to when he was drafted out of Tennessee 4 years ago. But I just have seen very little improvement in terms of his strength or his recognition, and I thought that we would see improvements in both. So to me, he has been one of the disappointments. I'll jump in with another one. Jackson Smith and Jigba. I want to see more consistency for a first-round pick, the number one wide receiver who was selected this year. I'm seeing so many other rookie wide receivers are leading to some of the most productive offenses in all of the NFL. In terms of the breakout players or the surprises, I think just the improvement that we've seen from Boye Mafe, kind of the exact opposite of what we've seen from Darrell Taylor, to me has been one of the biggest, most impressive things so far. And then again, Devin Witherspoon. I think that you should just put that picture there of his hit on Matthew Stafford up again, because if there's any Seahawks fans out there who are just kind of needing a little bit of a jolt of enthusiasm, then my goodness, the play of number 21 certainly has provided that all season long.
From a positive standpoint for me, you mentioned Boye Mafe. That's an easy pick, but I mentioned him as a breakout player going to the year, so I'm not going to say I'm surprised that Boye Mafe has had the production he's had. Maybe a little surprised he had a sack in 7 straight games with that streak being snapped yesterday. Had a couple chances to get Stafford, wasn't able to do it. But from a positive standpoint, for me, the biggest surprise has got to be Jake Bobo. I mean, he's been consistently making receptions in this offense, some of the really nice blocks that he's had as an undrafted rookie, him coming in with the talent they have at that position and still carving out a consistent role for himself. To me, that is still an incredible story. And he keeps coming through with plays when the Seahawks call on number 19. As far as disappointments, you could point at players, but look, I'm going to point at Shane Waldron. This is a guy that last year was the architect of a top 10 scoring offense with Geno Smith. And I had extremely high expectations coming into this year, his third year as the play caller. And instead, we talked about all the stats in the first quarter of the show here. And that, not all of that is going to be on Shane Waldron. The players still have to execute, but I just have been really disappointed by the lack of adjustments, the lack of adaptation from a play calling standpoint. I go back to that Ravens game. Literally no attempts to use the middle of the field, all these long developing routes outside the numbers. You were playing into the Ravens' strengths, and there's been so many games where it's felt like that kind of strategy's happened. Then yesterday, first possession of the second half, drop back to open the second half, and 3 and out. That didn't work. They went away from the run game, and then they wonder why they can't get the run game back. They put themselves in these positions. And so, look, there's still time for Shane Waldron to turn this thing around. But right now, I think they'd love to have Brian Schottenheimer calling plays, because one thing Brian Schottenheimer proved he could do in the 3 years he was offensive coordinator here in Seattle, he could adjust. He could adapt. And he did a great job with that. In fact, they had the second most points per game in 2020 in the fourth quarter. You want to talk about a guy that knew how to dial things up late in the game? We have not seen that from Shane Waldron. In fact, we haven't seen it the last 3 quarters. You get away from the script. I need to see a lot more from him from a play calling standpoint to take advantage of the talent he has. So I'm not putting players there. I'm putting a coach on the hot seat here. He needs to do a better job. Plain and simple. Coming up next, we're going to dish out our Monday musings, our in-depth takeaways coming out of yesterday's loss in LA. We'll be talking offense, defense, maybe a bit of special teams as well. Don't go away. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at DoorDash. Why root for your team on an empty stomach? That's a game day travesty that ensures you won't be cheering at your very best. Order on DoorDash and save on your football watch party favorites. You can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order on the DoorDash app with the code LOCKED23. If I'm kicking back watching the game, I'll be doing this soon on Monday Night Football with friends and family. I got to have myself some Jet City Pizza, the best gluten-free pizza in the Seattle region, and, of course, a big 2-liter of root beer to go with it. DoorDash makes the process easy, so I don't have to leave the comfort of my couch for delicious, great-tasting food before and after kickoff. It is certainly now an American tradition. Ready to satisfy your taste buds on game day? Quench those cravings with your favorite local restaurants at DoorDash. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order, downloading the DoorDash app and entering the code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Monday Musings, Misery Monday edition, coming off of a loss, a disappointing one. The Seahawks were ahead for basically 98% of this game and ended up losing in the closing minutes. Rob, you didn't get a chance to be on the post-game show, so this is your first opportunity to really delve into some of your thoughts coming out of this game. And I know on the offensive side of the football, there's certainly something that you were chomping at the bit to discuss coming out of this game.
Just run the damn ball. I mean, that's the thing is I told you before I was going to use some boxing analogies. You had the Rams on the ropes for the second time this season, and then you choose not to run the ball. What is the point of drafting Zach Charbonnet in the second round if when he finally gets an opportunity, and he was playing well, he's back basically in his hometown of LA, essentially. Obviously played his college ball at UCLA, as did Jake Bobo. And again, he is knocking guys on their backside. Corbin, the Seahawks ran the ball 16 times in the first half. They ran it 5 times in the second, and they did that with the lead. It just made so much sense to just continue to work the running game and to be able to keep that. Not that the Rams necessarily explosive offense, especially when Cooper Kupp went down with the ankle sprain. But still, that is the way that you silence that LA crowd, the way that you keep Matthew Stafford, who continues to play like the Hall of Famer that I think he's ultimately going to wind up becoming. But my goodness, it just seems like he plays so much better against the Seahawks. That's the way you keep him off the field. That's the way you can mitigate the star pass rusher that Aaron Donald is to run the ball right down their throat. And so to the point that you made before about Shane Walsh, I mean, the Seahawks have 9 touchdowns in the second half in 10 games this season. I mean, think about that number. It's absolutely staggering. So again, to me, it all comes back to running the football. I know it's not some would say that's a cliche. Well, it's a cliche for a reason. If you run the football effectively, everything else just opens up itself.
I'm going to get to my offensive takeaway of the day, but I want to talk special teams real quick first. And I know Jerick Reed, he's not one of the bigger names from Seattle's draft class, but he's had a very good rookie season on special teams. I think maybe aside from Jason Myers, I know we missed that kick at the end of the game yesterday, but he's been fabulous since starting the season off rough. Michael Dixon's playing well, but I think Jerick Reed has arguably been the best special teams player for the Seahawks. You watch the kick and punt coverage, he is consistently the first guy down there. He makes a ton of tackles. He leads the team in special teams tackles, and he just brings great energy and he brings effort every single snap. And Pete Carroll said he's got a significant knee injury. Now, we don't know how significant. He's going to miss time, but this is a big loss for the Seahawks on special teams. So I want to point that out first to acknowledge somebody that I think is playing much better than maybe the casual fan may realize on special teams. Jerick Reed has been really good. And when he's played a few snaps on defense earlier in the year, he made some plays too. I think he could be a part of this team's future on defense. So it's a bummer if he's got an injury that ends up costing him a bunch of time or maybe the rest of the season. We don't know the specific injury yet, but I think that's certainly a big storyline for this Seahawks team. As far as the offensive side of the football, I hate to sound like a broken record. Pete Carroll used that reference today talking about the third downs. I don't know how many times I've talked about the offensive line and the interior not being good enough, but that is the honest truth right now for this football team. You mentioned the run game. In the first half, they were running the ball fairly well. But the problem in the second half, when they did try to run the ball, and I'm going to say this is partially on the offensive coordinator again, because you just went away from running the ball, but that interior offensive line was not getting the job done. They were not creating holes. They were not creating any push off the line of scrimmage. That run that Geno Smith called late in the game, I went back and watched the film, and I can see why he dialed that play up. That could have hit for big yardage. You clock it, and then it's an easy field goal for Jason Myers. But the blocking wasn't executed properly up front by the interior offensive line. Linebacker comes up and makes an easy play. Those kind of things are so frustrating because I feel like the Seahawks have a lot more talent than they've had in the interior offensive line, and there have been games they've played well this year. But all the rotating guys in and out with injuries or just because you want to rotate them, they did that yesterday with Haynes and Bradford. At some point, you got to have your starters and let them play. And right now, I just don't know that that group is good enough yet to where they need it to be for this offense to truly reach its potential.
Yeah, again, I mean, I highlighted the fact that the Seahawks only ran the ball 5 times, considering that was one of the 5 times was Geno Smith just deciding to give the ball to Zach Charbonnet basically on a desperation play at the end there. Again, just kind of shows how the lack of commitment to the running game when it actually made sense to go with the running game. And speaking of Geno Smith, I mean, let's just give some credit here for just the grit, the toughness, the competitiveness that he showed in getting back onto the football field. And Corbin, you know me, I've been a Drew Lock supporter for a long time, back when he was playing with the Denver Broncos, was a second-round pick out of Missouri. I think that still what he was asked to do in this situation when he had wide receivers who didn't even turn to look for the football, when he was throwing some pretty damn accurate balls. The one thing I did catch in your post-game show was the arm punt, so to speak, that he threw up the sidelines of Tyler Lockett. I mean, if you're going to throw a ball, I thought it was the correct read. It's one-on-one coverage. Drew Lock has the arm to throw it out there. But if he is going to make that throw, then you've got to throw that ball deep and then let a speedster like Tyler Lockett go and get it, or Tyler Lockett has to jump a little bit more back into the defender to try and create the pass interference calls that Tyler Lockett has done a great job of in the past. The fact that neither of those things happened, I think just kind of shows the fact that the Seahawks right now, with Drew Lock at the quarterback position, there is not a lot of communication between he and his receivers. There's not a lot of rapport there. And so it was a disaster waiting to happen. I don't think you can put all of that blame on Drew Lock, but I think that it was fairly predictable what was going to happen. And that's why the Seahawks did have a chance when number 7 got back onto the field, just because the fact that it does feel like the Seahawks wide receivers do play with a little bit more snap, a little bit more precision when he's the one that's throwing balls.
For those that have been begging for Drew Lock to take over as the quarterback, I think yesterday was a friendly reminder why maybe you should be careful what you wish for. But I don't think all of that fell on him. I didn't like the play calling in any of the drives that he was out there. It felt like it was a dump off or handoff and then chuck it downfield. That was the setup. Instead of trying to give him some easy completions to get him into the game, they didn't do that. So again, I'm going to put most of the blame on the guy that's calling the plays here. I'm not going to put it on the quarterback because I just didn't like the play calls there for the situation that a backup was being thrown into when you got guys like Aaron Donald that are going to be coming after you. On the defensive side of the football, I'm going to go from a positive perspective here because, again, 17 points, you should win the game when you give up 17 points. And I know that they broke down some in the fourth quarter, but this is my opinion watching the film. I think the secondary deserved better than they received on most of those penalties. I know they had 130 yards of penalties in this game, Rob, but I would say maybe half of those were justified. The pass interference on Devin Witherspoon in the end zone, Pete Carroll today criticized that call, and he deserved to. I mean, nothing happened there except Quandre Diggs got ran over by Puka Nacua. There was nothing there. There was no shove. There was nothing. That penalty shouldn't have been called. The one they called on Reek Woolen that his fingertip barely touched on the face mask. I'm sorry, but you can't make a call like that. It's ticky-tack, as Quandre Diggs said after the game. There were a number of penalties here that I didn't feel like should have been called. Hold on to your flag. Don't become the game, officials. That being said, there were some bad ones too. The Julian Love pass interference in the game, Seattle ended up holding the Rams without any points, so it didn't matter in the scheme of things, but that was a desperation penalty that did not need to happen. There were a couple other holds that were called in Seattle that were legitimate, but my point is the secondary held the Rams to 17 points. Matthew Stafford didn't even get to 200 passing yards in this game. They picked off a flea flicker. The secondary did a fine job for most of this game. And so to me, that is still a positive. They gave up 30 points in week 1. They gave up 17 this game. You should win that football game. So everything just keeps going back to the offense for not being able to execute late to be able to win the game.
I thought that the secondary did perform well. I thought the pass rush was non-existent and basically should hand back in their game checks, frankly, Corbin. I mean, I thought it was an embarrassment. I mean, you're looking at the Rams and offensive line with a slow-footed quarterback, and Seattle got 3. Count them, 3 quarterback hits. The only sack they got, of course, was the nickel cornerback Devin Witherspoon on a blitz in the first series. I mean, it was just abysmal. We have given Boye Mafe an awful lot of credit, and deservedly so, with that 7-game stretch. But besides for one pass breakup, he basically turned into Blutarski in this game, 0.0. Not a single tackle, not a single sack, of course, not a tackle for loss, not a quarterback hit, nothing. He basically didn't play in the game. And I already kind of criticized, certainly Frank Clark and Darrell Taylor. Draymond Jones, 1 tackle in this game. I mean, my goodness, the Seahawks
no pressures.
Pass rush was just 100% not there. And so, again, it's a little bit of a discredit to Seattle's defensive lineman in this game. And I think that it definitely is a credit to offensive play caller on the other side of the ball that recognize that you do have an aging quarterback in Matthew Stafford, but allow him to do some bootlegs to run himself out of pressure, change where the pocket is going to be. I give the Rams an awful lot of credit. They beat the Seahawks in just about every single way in which they needed to do so.
As always, you can follow me on Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob on Twitter, on X, whatever you want to call it, at Rob Rang. Make sure to follow and subscribe Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We'll have a special edition, Tell the Truth Tuesday tomorrow. This is a short week. We have to combine everything, maybe even get some matchups in for a matchup Tuesday tomorrow. We shall see, but make sure that you are listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.